Stand at the threshold of what we call night, and you will feel it, a subtle tremor in the soul, where knowledge ends and mystery begins. Tonight we journey to the edge of the Milky Way, not to count stars, but to find the part of ourselves that those stars remember. There is a particular silence that descends at the edge of a map, a hush that announces the boundary between cartography and myth. The map speaks in lines and coordinates, in confidence and measure. The hush beyond speaks in images, in impulses and old, half-remembered songs. When we speak of the edge of the Milky Way, we are tempted to think only in astrophysical terms, the physics that bind gas and star, the mathematics that predict the curves of space. Yet this earthly brilliance, these equations, remain only part of the encounter. There is, alongside the telescopic glass and the hum of instrumentation, an inner threshold, a psychical place where the cosmos touches the soul. Standing there is like standing at the mouth of a great cavern. Your foot is on firm ground, but your gaze is drawn into depths whose architecture no instrument alone can reveal. To understand this threshold, we must change metaphors. Scientific method is glorious for the work it does. It enables us to reduce, isolate, and to render the universe treatable by experiment. But the threshold demands an epistemology that has humility at its core. When a person looks up at the river of light arching overhead, the experience is not merely an input for a data stream. The experience is an event, an occasion that reshapes the interior field of meaning. Light becomes more than photon. It becomes memory, promise, dread. This is not a failure of science. It is a recognition of the many registers of reality. The cosmos does not only reveal itself in spectral lines, it makes claim upon us. It calls art, story, obsession into being. We must consider the psychological mechanics of standing at an edge. Edges provoke a paradoxical response. They invite both exploration and withdrawal. They solicit curiosity and arouse fear. The mind that approaches the cosmic rim oscillates between the exhilaration of discovery and the ancient anxiety of abandonment. This oscillation is vital. It signals that the psyche is alive and responsive. The person who ignores this tremor for the sake of cold conquest will have achieved technical mastery perhaps, but will have missed an initiation that both science and spirit have undergone together for centuries. The threshold is an initiation. It asks us to be measured in our hunger, to let insight enter not only the intellect but the heart. What then is the task at the threshold? It is to cultivate a form of witnessing that is both rigorous and reverent. To be rigorous is to respect method, to control variables, to test, to verify. To be reverent is to remember that some phenomena carry meaning that cannot be scrubbed clean by scales and meters. Reverence does not mean surrender. It is a posture of attentive humility before phenomena that impact our narrative selves. The scientist who can be reverent will not abandon testability. Rather, such a person will broaden the testable questions to include matters of value and purpose. The witness at the threshold learns to articulate not only what the universe does, but what it asks of us. Moreover, the threshold is inherently dialogical. The cosmos, when experienced from the rim, does not passively lie before us like a book to be read. Instead, it becomes the stimulus for a dialogue that we carry within. Ancient civilizations spoke of the sky as the theater of the gods. They intuitively perceived a reciprocity between human inner life and cosmic motion. Modern entrants to that theater often privilege the one over the other, yet the psychology of the threshold insists that reciprocity matters. When we allow our inner question to meet the universe's form, a creative exchange begins. We ask, and the cosmos answers not only in measured signatures, but in the manner our attention frames them. The conversation is reciprocal, because attention is not inert. It structures the very possibilities we observe. This brings us to an ethical dimension. The threshold demands responsibility. When knowledge of cosmological scale informs policy, technology, and ideology, The spirit of threshold experience can either dilute or ground those applications. Without ethical gravity, progress is likely to become a narrative of domination, more power, wider reach, less reflection. With ethical gravity, exploration becomes a task of stewardship. The knowledge we cultivate at the rim of the Milky Way should not merely feed instruments. It should inform a cultivated imagination that honors the fragility of life and the webs of connection that give human flourishing its texture. Finally, it is necessary to recognize the personal transformation the threshold affords. To stand at that place is often to face not only cosmic vastness, but personal smallness. Yet paradoxically, smallness can be liberating. The realization of one's contingency can open the heart to solidarity and depth. The threshold transforms the seeker. It softens arrogance, sharpens wonder, and calls forth an appetite for integration. If we are willing to be changed, the edge becomes less a border of fright and more a portal of initiation. And if a culture can cultivate many such initiates, investigators who are both exacting and soulful, then the scientific endeavor will have been endowed with a maturity it has long needed, knowledge married to meaning, curiosity tempered by care. So the first lesson of the Milky Way's rim is a practice. Learn to stand at thresholds with dual competence, scientific clarity and interior reverence. Only from that stance can we proceed in ways that do justice to both the outer universe we measure and the inner universe that measures meaning. Human beings have always read the sky as if it were a text. We project our myths, our fears, and our hopes onto its canvas. The band of the Milky Way is particularly eloquent, a luminous river that has carried innumerable narratives across ages. Often modern sensibility mistakes such projection for error. We assume that symbolic reading contaminates objective observation. Yet symbols are not incidental ephemera. They are cognitive tools forged by history to organize complexity. The starry sky, when considered as symbol, shifts from being merely a subject of astronomy to being an active interlocutor in human meaning-making. Why do stars become symbols at all? The answer is rooted in experiential economy. Human cognition must manage an unending flood of sensory data. Symbols compress and express complex relations into manageable images. A tree can compress ideas of life, rootedness, and growth. The moon can compress cycles of becoming and waning. Stars, by their constancy and instability, constant in presence, unstable in their eventual death, are perfect templates for human reflection on permanence and change. A star's life cycle maps onto personal and cultural arcs: birth, maturity, decline, rebirth, and other forms. When we cast these cycles as images, we are giving shape to the deep motions of psyche. Consider the night a community points to a particular star and says, "That one is the guide." The choice is not arbitrary. The guide role belongs to the image that resonates with shared need. In times of voyage, we look for waypoints. In times of exile, we look for signs. Symbols like stars accumulate layers of function: practical, mnemonic, and sacred. A star that was once a handy landmark becomes also a repository of a people's memory, an anchor for ritual and moral continuity. Thus, the very human act of naming the sky is an act of world-making. It reconfigures the environment into a living map for collective life. There is a caution encoded here. If a culture's symbolic sky hardens into ideology, it can lock imagination and permit cruelty. Ideology converts symbol into injunction, and what was once evocative becomes authoritarian. Healthy symbolic life therefore requires fluidity. The image must remain open to reinterpretation. The living symbol is porous. It allows new context to re-speak old images. The image of a star can be reinterrogated by successive generations, each adding its shade and nuance. This is precisely what makes stars fruitful sources of reflective life. They are stable enough to be trusted, yet mutable enough to remain alive. For the scientist who also tends to the soul, this has practical consequences. Discoveries that alter our cosmic map, supernovae, The identification of novel galactic structures, the understanding of dark matter, do not only change textbooks, they shift the symbolic constellation of the culture. When the sky in people's minds changes, so does their story about place and destiny. The discovery that our galaxy is not the center of all things once undercut cosmic hubris. Similarly, we must expect that present-day revisions to cosmology will ripple into ethics, identity, and myth. Therefore, those who generate such knowledge would do well to collaborate with those who steward meaning, artists, poets, ritual practitioners, so that new scientific insights can be integrated into symbolic frameworks that nourish rather than fragment the psyche. There is also a personal dimension to stars as symbols. A person who learns to read the sky in symbolic register develops an interior literacy, one that can translate outer events into compassionate inner responses. When a life event appears as eclipse or storm, loss, illness, rupture, the symbolic reader can name stages, predict pitfalls, and invoke practices that encourage wholeness. This capacity is a kind of psychological technique, not mystical guesswork. It is a skill that ameliorates suffering by providing metaphors that orient bereftness into a meaningful arc. Finally, symbols are performative. They invite action. To call the night a rever suggests motion and crossing. To call it a veil suggests concealment and revelation. The metaphors we live by prompt the practices we choose. If we reframe the Milky Way as a threshold rather than a wall, we are more likely to engage in practices of crossing, rituals, contemplations, voyages of learning, that reflect integration rather than escape. Thus, the scientist's discovery and the poet's metaphor together create not contradiction, but a richer field for human navigation. When we allow stars to be symbols in this integrated sense, we repair a split outer observation is paired with inner orientation. The sky stops being merely an object and becomes a living grammar that instructs the heart. In that teaching we find resources to face the unknown with poise, not by denying uncertainty, but by learning to dwell within it. There is within each human an inarticulate ache, a longing that is more ancient than hunger, more intimate than curiosity. It is the tug that sends a person away from the comfort of the known and towards horizons that unsettle. On a grand scale, this longing fuels voyages to the limits of our galaxy. On a private scale, it fuels the arduous work of psychological growth. The two longings are siblings. The desire to cross the Milky Way's border is, in its deepest register, an impulse toward individuation, toward the realization of a singular self that is nevertheless in relation to the whole. Individuation is often spoken of as a solitary path, withdrawal, introspection, the unmasking of persona. Yet its proper course is not isolation. It is a process of reconciling inner differences so that a person can act in the world with integrity. Similarly, cosmic exploration without inner integration becomes a conquest. It imagines the universe as a quarry for mastery. The longing to cross, when mature, transforms. It is not driven by compulsion to own or control, but by a reverent curiosity that seeks communion and learning. This distinction matters because the energies we mobilize at the rim of the galaxy will shape future possibilities. If we project unresolved drives, power, immortality, domination, into the cosmos, we shall entrench patterns of harm on a broader stage. If we bring a path of interfacing, awareness of shadow, acceptance of limitation, cultivation of responsive care, the outward exploration may become a gesture of repair. Hence, the ethical framing of cosmic desire becomes indispensable. Consider the psychological architecture of explorers. The person who voyages outward often repeats inner moves. They leave home, they test boundaries, they return changed. In myth, the hero crosses the sea, descends into the cave, or climbs the mountain. Each motif in the mythic grammar corresponds to an interior process of transformation. The explorer at the Milky Way's edge encounters an external sea, whose danger and beauty reflect personal thresholds of courage and humility. Successful crossing, in the mythic sense, offers a boon and new vision that can be brought back to the community. The failure to integrate the boon, however, risks turning discovery into alienation, knowledge without soul. There is a further nuance. The longing to cross is not merely an aspiration to novelty, it is also a demand for synthesis. Humans crave wholeness, the reunion of intellect and feeling, of purpose and method. The practice of individuation trains attention to how one's desires align with the common good. Thus, a healthy cosmic longing will be accompanied by a reflective interrogation. Why do we wish to know? For whom do we seek expansion? By facing such questions, explorers can transform personal yearning into communal creativity. Practically, cultivating responsible explorer selves requires structures, rites of passage that accompany scientific careers, ethical training that includes narrative humility, mentorship that emphasizes the stewardly use of knowledge. Institutions must invest not only in instruments, but in practices that develop the character of those who wield them. The technology that propels a ship beyond a galactic arm should be matched by curricula that train attention, empathy, and symbolic fluency. Only then will external crossing be mirrored by internal maturation. Finally, the longing to cross tells us about time. Individuation is not instantaneous. It is a long arc that mirrors cosmic processes. Stars are born, live expand, die, and seed new life. Processes that carry within them the tempo of maturation. When we attune to that tempo, impatience softens and perseverance deepens. The longing becomes patient, not frenzied. We move forward with respect for the rhythms that sustain both cosmos and psyche. In doing so, the edge of the Milky Way ceases to be only a boundary of distance. It becomes a school of patience, humility, and depth. Darkness is often spoken of as a negation, the absence of light, the enemy of vision. Yet darkness, particularly at the cosmic rim, is more usefully thought of as a canvas, a receptive field in which possibility forms. The human mind, terrified by blankness, often rushes to fill it with facial certainties, yet the space between known facts is where new images must be born. Creativity loves the void, because it requires a place where nothing yet points insistently in a certain direction. The dark at the edge of the Milky Way, then, is not merely a problem to be solved, it is a resource to be cultivated. To cultivate darkness is to cultivate a disciplined patience, a tolerance for ambiguity that modern life too often undermines. Our educational and professional systems prize immediate answers and demonstrable impact. This pressure produces engineers of swiftness, not of reflective insight. But when confronted with the unknown, speed is often a distraction from depth. The mind trained in slow attention is capable of waiting until the image arrives fully formed, rather than improvising a shallow answer to fill discomfort. There is a psychological mechanism at play when we allow not knowing to be operative rather than avoidable. The unconscious begins to assemble patterns and metaphors that can be made conscious later. Dream work is an example. A night of not knowing, sleep, permits the psyche to reconfigure experience and to furnish waking life with new metaphors. Thus the darkness becomes the incubator of meaning. The same is true on a cultural scale. Societies that place rituals of silence, mourning, and reflection in public space enable communal unconscious to process traumatic or novel information. The rim of the galaxy invites such collective incubation. We must also accept that darkness tests the ego. The ego prefers its continuity and narrative. The unknown threatens discontinuity. Creative darkness invites the ego to loosen its grip. This is not to annihilate the ego but to temper it. A tempered ego is capable of listening. A listening ego hears paradox, receives images, and is willing to revise its priorities. Creative leaders, scientific and cultural, therefore must be trained to hold themselves lightly enough to allow surprise and to steward the images that arise from the void. Practically, embracing darkness will change method. It will require research environments, that value slow methods, longitudinal studies, contemplative reflection among teams, and institutional spaces for silence and synthesis. It will also require aesthetic sensibilities, science presentation that does not merely celebrate spectacle, but cultivates the capacity to sit with open questions. When institutions learn to make spaces for darkness, innovation becomes less frantic and more durable. The darkness at the Milky Way's edge is also a moral provocation. It calls us to humility, reminding us that our mastery is partial and that the universe will not be consumed by our appetites. But it also calls us to creativity, to imagine social and technological designs that serve long arcs of flourishing. If we can learn to dwell in the creative darkness, we will avail ourselves of sources of transformation that are both bold and wise. Across cultures, the sky has been a repository of archetypal motifs, recurrent figures and themes that pattern human experience. These archetypes, the guide, the shadow, the hero, the threshold keeper, are not merely literary ornaments. They are psychological formations lodged deep in the collective field. At the rim of the Milky Way, these motifs surface with clarity because the cosmic scene intensifies human metaphor making. The starry river becomes a gallery where ancestral figures are displayed and reinterpreted. To approach archetype is to enter a domain where memory and myth conspire to form cultural sensibilities. Memory here is not only biographical, it is species-wide. It carries traces of survival strategies, communal wounds, and recurring solutions. Myth is the narrative grammar that arranges these traces into meaning, making patterns. When a civilization contemplates the edge of its galaxy, what emerges in its myths matters as much as what emerges in its instruments. The archetype of the guide, for example, has operated in human life as the structure that enables safe crossing from one psychological state to another. The presence or absence of guides in cultural imagination affects how collective expeditions, scientific or migratory, are staged and supported. There is a therapeutic function to archetypes. They provide scripts for coping, models of behavior in extremis, and names for experiences that would otherwise remain ungraspable. When a person feels possessed by awe before the Milky Way's band, to interpret it as an encounter with the numinous may be more helpful than to reduce it immediately to cognitive processes. Naming thus becomes a practice of containment. It frames the emotion and allows for integration. Hence, archetype is not a superstition, but a clinical tool for psychic navigation. Archetypes also act as conduits for cultural continuity. When myths about the sky are preserved, through songs, rituals, stories, they carry ways of being that can stabilize societies across turbulence. The loss of such myths can leave a cultural void that is often filled by ideologies that reduce complexity to simple drives. Protecting and renewing archetypal resources is therefore a social task, not merely the work of antiquarians, but of educators, artists, and civic leaders. The stories we tell about the Milky Way will shape how we move through it. Finally, archetypes on the rim function as ethical mirrors. They reflect back the values embedded in our quests. Do our stories frame the cosmic as conquest or as communion? Do they elevate mastery or stewardship? The choice matters. The metaphors we live by become the policies we pursue. If our archetypal grammar emphasizes reciprocity, our collective ventures into the cosmos will likely be framed around reciprocity with other forms of life and the cosmic environment. If our grammar accentuates domination, our ventures may replicate extractive patterns on a galactic scale. The work then is both imaginative and practical to curate myths that support humane and wise exploration. Scientists and myth keepers must engage in dialogue so that the archetypes that accompany cosmic projects are those that favor preservation, humility, and mutual flourishing. In that collaboration, we may find an ethos befitting the scale of our ventures. Any true pilgrimage has a return. Those who travel outward with curiosity must bring back what they learn into the ordinary world. Integration is the art of translating cosmic encounter into a transformed life, into institutions, habits, and relationships that embody the wisdom glimpsed at the rim. Integration is difficult because it requires coherence across domains: cognitive, emotional, moral. It requires translating the rarefied insight of a threshold into policies that alter daily practices. To integrate is to practice holding paradox. The Milky Way's edge teaches us that reality is generous in paradoxy. Something can be both beautiful and dangerous, our knowledge both powerful and provisional. A culture that can hold paradox can create institutions that are resilient, education that values both analytic skill and symbolic literacy, research programs that include ethical imagination as core methodology, and public narratives that honor complexity instead of flattening it. Integration also demands practices of embodiment. Knowledge that remains cerebral rarely alters the shape of life. Rituals, simple repeated practices that keep memory alive, are vital. Rituals at a societal level could include public days of cosmic reflection, curricula that include contemplative practices alongside scientific training, and community dialogues that translate discoveries into narratives of responsibility. Rituals anchor insight. They prevent knowledge from becoming an ephemeral spectacle, and instead make it the substrate of daily choices. Furthermore, integration requires structural shifts in how we measure success. GDP and technical benchmarks are insufficient measures of a civilization's health. We must develop metrics that account for symbolic competence, psychic well-being, and generative imagination. Such measures are not soft sentimentalities. They are predictors of social stability, creativity, and sustainability. When a culture values meaning alongside production, it will tend to design technologies and institutions that are humane and wise. Finally, integration is an ethical project because it binds us to the future. The wisdom gleaned at the edge must be used to steward worlds not yet born. It is an intergenerational covenant. We act not only for our immediate benefit, but for the conditions that will allow future beings, human or otherwise, to flourish. This covenant turns exploration into a moral vocation. If we return from the edge with new sight, we will conduct science with a voice of humility and a practice of care. We will craft stories that enlarge rather than flatten human possibility. We will teach minds to measure and hearts to remember. In that synthesis, the real journey of the Milky Way's edge is fulfilled. We do not, in the end, master the cosmos. We are mastered by a larger intelligence that refines our own.